dip the spoon in water. Just grab a little bit of the starter. Oh hey, not sure if your sourdough starter is ready to use? Today I'll show you how to do the sourdough float test, which is one of the ways to test if your sourdough starter is ready for baking bread. Here we go. So I've actually got 3 different starters here. I've got a whole grain rye sourdough starter that I fed about 12 hours ago, and it's doubled in size, and it's just kind of reached its peak, and it's about to start falling down. Same thing with my sourdough starter here, which is fed with bread flour, just white high protein bread flour, and it's also doubled in size. It's really bubbly, and it's about to start falling back down. And then here is the sourdough discard that I fed these starters with. It's fed over 24 hours ago. It's just totally done. It's risen and fallen back down again. You can see, and it smells really acidic. I'm going to show you the float test on these 2 different starters and the sourdough discard to show you how these should ideally float in water and this one should not. When you feed your sourdough starter, I marked this one with a band so you could see where it started. Once you feed it, it starts rising and filling up with air. So once it's about at its peak, about doubled in size, it should be puffy and really full of air. And so that air is what should make this starter float in water. Really, if it's doubled in size, it's ready to use, but the way you test it with the float test just shows us that it has enough air inside, and it's a good sign that it's ready to use. So let's do the float test on this rye starter. I like to dip the spoon in water. Just grab a little bit of the starter. Drop it right on top of the water. You can see there that it floats. Floating sourdough. If it floats, you can use it. Now let's do the same float test on the starter made with bread flour. Just gonna get the spoon wet. Take a little spoonful. Drop it right on top of the water. And it floats. Check that out. It's ready to use. Now I'm going to show you the float test on this sourdough discard. It's been fed a long time ago. If you fed your sourdough starter too recently or too long ago, it should not pass the float test, and it won't be ideal for baking bread with. The reason is if you feed it too recently, it won't have had time to rise, it won't have had time to fill up with air, and so it shouldn't be floating in water. Same thing if it's too old. It will have risen and fallen back down again. All the air would have gone out of the starter. And so you technically can use it in bread, but it won't be at its peak. It won't be ideal, and it shouldn't pass the float test. So let's see what this one looks like when you try to get it to float. This is just like my rye starter, except I don't think it's going to float. Nope. It sank right to the bottom. Not enough air in the sourdough discard. If you fed your starter and you've waited 4 to 8, maybe 12 hours, and it's doubled in size, one way to check if it's ready to use is to drop a spoonful in some water, and it should float like these 2 starters here. If it doesn't float, that means it's not at its peak, and it's not quite ideal to use. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to learn more about how to make bread, sourdough, and pizza at home, click the subscribe button. I'll see you next time.